The funeral ended before the smell of incense could settle. I stood at the threshold of the family altar, eyes tracing the faint glow of candlelight flickering beneath my father's portrait. It was the only photo Hayrin approved, a formal shot from a corporate profile, where his smile was barely a curve and his tie sat too tight around his throat. The frame was too new, too untouched, like someone had chosen detachment on purpose. Outside, shoes shuffled over gravel, guests murmured apologies they didn't mean and handed envelopes they barely remembered to seal. No one stayed. Not the relatives from Busan, not my father's law partners, not even my middle school teacher, who once promised to visit no matter what. The tray of rice cakes remained full. The tea turned cold beside the portrait. Only she moved through the silence with purpose. Min Hayrin? Her blouse was the same champagne color as the tea set. Silk, of course, sleeves barely creased despite hours of service. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden floor, stopping only to lift a cup or fold a napkin in the middle of someone else's grief. "You've been standing too long, Ji-won," she said quietly, not looking at me. "Your father wouldn't want that." Her voice was always velvet, not kind, calculated. I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice to stay level. The house felt different already, not in furniture or layout, but in presence, like something invisible had shifted. Something sacred that once moved through this place with the quiet thrum of a heartbeat was gone, and she'd vacuumed the echo before I could notice. Later that evening, I went to the study. The hallway leading to it was darker than I remembered. The light bulb above buzzed, then flickered out. I paused, hand resting on the doorknob. It didn't turn. I blinked once, twice. Tried again, harder. The metal was cold beneath my palm. Then I saw it. A matte black keypad, freshly installed where the lock used to be. I knocked once. Nothing. Again. Ill silence. The next morning, I asked her directly in the kitchen. The smell of barley tea mixed with furniture polish. "The study's locked," I said. "Was something stolen?" She looked up from her teacup without raising her head fully, eyes tilted but emotionless. "I'm reorganizing some documents. Your father wanted everything handled cleanly?" "What does that mean?" My voice cracked on the word mean. I hated that. "It means," she said, rising with deliberate grace, "until you're older, I'll keep things in order. That's what he asked me to do." I watched her across the kitchen in slow, precise movements. Her sleeves never dragged, her footsteps never echoed. Every gesture was muted elegance, as if grief had no right to disturb the room. He would never ask that. He would never lock me out. That night, I opened the mailbox. Empty. Again. 3 days in a row. I knew my father's bank correspondences always arrived at the start of the month. I used to sort them for him, sitting at the dining table with a bowl of tangerines between us. I'd read them aloud, and he'd make comments about tax brackets or real estate cycles. Now there was nothing. Later, I overheard her on the phone. The door was cracked open, her voice feather soft. "Yes, expedite the inspection. No, I've already filed the appraisal. Title reassignment should finalize this week." Appraisal? Reassignment? I stepped away before the boards creaked. It continued like that, quietly, like erosion. Little things disappeared. My father's coat rack by the door was replaced with a minimalist steel one. The family photos on the mantel thinned, and when I asked about them, she tilted her head and said, "They looked outdated. You'll understand when you're older." I didn't argue. What could I say? Then one evening, as I walked in from school, still in uniform, damp from a late autumn drizzle, she met me in the hallway with a folded paper. Her expression was serene, always serene. "These are the utility breakdowns for the month. You're nearly 17 now, Ji-won. Time to start learning the value of shared responsibility." I didn't reach for the paper immediately. "I'm still in high school." She smiled, soft, empty. "And you live here. It's not about age, it's about contribution. That's how families stay strong." Family? Oh, I took the paper. The columns blurred for a moment before I blinked. Electricity, water, heating, internet. Her handwriting was delicate in the margins. Rent wasn't listed. Not directly. but the implication was as loud as thunder in a library. As I walked past her toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse of her in the mirror beside the hallway. She was adjusting her cufflink. Not jewelry, not vanity, control. I paused halfway up the stairs. What happens when I turn 18? She didn't look at me, her hand smoothed over her collar. Then we'll discuss more permanent arrangements. I didn't ask again. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. Instead, I folded the paper in half, pressed it into the back of my journal, and made a quiet note to myself. Begin counting what's yours. Quietly, precisely, without emotion. I turned 18 with a pen in my hand and an expectation in my chest. The kind of quiet hope that clings to logic, not fantasy. I'd done the math. I'd read the inheritance law packets at the school library, dog-eared the margins, memorized what I could. 18 marked the age of majority. The age when wait your turn ended. The age when sealed drawers and whispered answers lost legal weight. So when I found Hayden seated by the veranda that morning, fingers gliding over her tablet as the sun traced soft patterns across the white curtains, I stood straighter. She looked up before I spoke. Her expression didn't shift. "You're up early." "I wanted to talk about Father's will," I said, carefully. "Now that I'm legal age, I'd like to see the documents." A long silence followed. It wasn't cold, it was curated. She set the tablet down slowly, folding her hands in her lap. The light caught the shimmer in her nails, manicured to a neutral gloss. "There is no need," she replied, her tone so smooth it could have passed for kindness. "Your father asked me to consolidate everything. It's all under managed holdings now." I blinked. "What does that mean?" Her head tilted slightly. "It means it's being taken care of." "That's not an answer." The words hovered inside me, sharp and eager. I swallowed them. "I'd like to see the original will," I tried again, more carefully this time. "Even if you're the executor, I have a right." "You're very bright, Ji-won," she said, almost wistful. "But you don't understand how these things work. There's no use digging into documents that are already resolved. Trust me. Your father wanted peace." She turned her gaze back to the tablet. Conversation dismissed. A silence stretched between us. My hands were still at my sides. I hadn't sat down. "He told me once," I said slowly, "that I'd inherit the study." That got her attention. Her eyes lifted. "Did he now?" I nodded, throat tightening. A beat passed. Her smile was thin, more polished than sincere. "Well," she murmured, "that was before he fell ill. Priorities changed. It was a very stressful time for everyone. Except you." She stood, brushing imaginary dust from her blouse. A pale pearl pin sat at her collar, elegant, motionless. "You're welcome to stay, of course," she said, walking past me, hand grazing the doorframe with absent grace. "But I suggest focusing on your future rather than the past. It'll bring you more peace." I stood frozen in place for several minutes after she left. Sunlight kept moving across the curtains. Outside, the gate chime rang once, twice, then faded. That afternoon, I entered my room and began folding clothes into my old suitcase. No tears, no music playing in the background, just the soft hum of a zipper and the weight of cotton against my fingers. A sweater, 2 shirts, jeans. The scholarship documents I'd hidden under my pillow. A framed photo of my father, printed from an old phone, one where he still smiled like he meant it. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor. I grew up here. The wood panels were slightly warped from when I'd spilled pomegranate juice and lied about it. The corner where the wallpaper curled, I used to draw constellations there when I couldn't sleep. Everything felt smaller, as if the room had shrunk each time something was taken from it. When I stepped into the hallway with the suitcase, she was there again, at the bottom of the stairs, holding a mug in both hands. The same pale mug with the tiny cherry blossom pattern she always used. Her eyes flicked to the luggage, then back to my face. "Where are you going?" "To school," I said simply. "You could have told me." Her voice had no edge to it, not guilt, not fear, not anything. "I'm telling you now." There was a pause. Her fingers tightened ever so slightly on the mug. Stay at least for dinner. I already ordered Ely, your favorite. I didn't answer. I adjusted my grip on the handle and moved past her. She didn't step aside immediately, but I didn't stop either. At the door, I placed my shoes on slowly. The hallway mirror caught a reflection neither of us wanted. Two women standing close enough to touch, yet entirely elsewhere. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now. I didn't turn around. "I'll manage." The word hung heavy between us. As I opened the door, she said, "You always took things too personally, Jiwon." I froze for the briefest second. Personal? Losing my father, my home, my history? She called that personal? I stepped outside. The evening air hit me like water that had forgotten how to be warm. The scent of pine from the neighbor's garden drifted across the gate. The metal of the handle was warm from the afternoon sun, but it felt foreign in my grip. When the door clicked shut behind me, I didn't look back. I walked until the house disappeared behind the line of parked cars. She looks at it once, then folds it carefully and tucks it into the inner lining of her coat. Her eyes rise to the skyline. They don't hold fear. They hold something colder. Structure. The air outside that night tasted of rust and road dust. I waited at the bus stop until the sky had turned violet and the street lamps buzzed overhead, their glow more flicker than warmth. When I boarded, the driver didn't speak. Neither did I. My suitcase sat against my legs like an anchor I refused to drop. I spent the first night in a hostel with thin walls and colder bedsheets. There was a ticking pipe near the ceiling and a stain on the curtain no one bothered to scrub. I stared at the ceiling until morning. Not because I couldn't sleep, because I was cataloging everything I had left. My ID, my scholarship award letter, one damaged suitcase, one folded photo, one name I was no longer sure I wanted to keep. "Dojiwana," I wrote across the top of the notepad that next morning. Then I drew a line through it. The girl with that name had waited too long. At university, I never spoke more than required. My classmates mistook it for shyness, sometimes arrogance. I never corrected them. I didn't make friends. I made files. I tracked syllabus requirements and saved every scanned page of my textbooks. I memorized land registration laws before others opened their first chapters. When others posted dorm photos online, I deleted the app. When they celebrated birthdays in cafes, I scheduled quiet meetings with professors, asking about zoning loopholes and asset transfer precedents. They laughed over coffee. I learned how real estate fraud buried family names without needing a shovel. One professor once paused mid-sentence while explaining arbitration procedure and looked at me strangely. "You're studying this like it's personal," he said. I didn't blink. Isn't it always? I never spoke of Heirin. I never used her name again, not even in thought. She had become a category in my studies, a case, a specimen of power held through politeness and perfected omission. I stopped dreaming of confrontation. I started building equations, legal formulas, asset ladders, administrative traps wrapped in fine print. In my third year, I created a legal alias, Min Seo-ha. The name meant little. It was quiet, neutral, untraceable. I registered a limited holding firm under that name using scholarship stipend savings and work-study bonuses no one ever asked about. I signed everything electronically. No fingerprints, no face. The firm acquired small units at the edge of urban collapse. Properties no bank wanted to touch, foreclosures buried under old debt and bad paperwork. I bought them cheap, partnered with underfunded renovators, and sold to newer clients who never thought to question where the name Min Seo-ha came from. Money didn't flood in, it trickled. Clean, quiet, persistent. Enough for a one-bedroom flat near the Han River with peeling paint and a kitchen the size of a closet. I liked it. It made no promises. It was mine. On my 25th birthday, I received a foreclosure alert. Routine. One of my keyword alerts had triggered. The property was listed under collateral failure, tied to a skincare business loan. Location, 142 Myeongin Drive. I didn't breathe for several seconds. I clicked the file open. The photos confirmed it. Red tile roof, white porch railing, the slight dip in the left gutter still unfixed. Her house, my father's house. It was listed under a business holding, Moon Rejuvenate Skincare. The debt had defaulted over 6 months prior. The property had shifted between shell firms registered under her old names. This was the last string in a failing kite. The market value had dropped below reserve. No public bid had matched it. A foreclosure auction was scheduled. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I didn't attend class. I sat at my desk, lights dimmed, shades drawn, and submitted a sealed offer through a private financial channel. It was funded through my firm's backup account, one I'd filled through 6 years of precision. The offer wasn't dramatic, it was just clean, professional, enough to pass every filter without drawing suspicion. 3 days later, a confirmation arrived. Accepted. Pending transfer. I stared at the screen for a long time. It's not because I was surprised, because the loop had closed and it hadn't made a sound. I didn't call anyone, there was no one to call. I stood slowly, walked to my window, and looked out at the Han River, its waters dark and motionless under a sky that didn't care. My fingers grazed the inside lining of my coat pocket. The photo was still there, folded. I hadn't looked at it in 2 years. I pressed it flat against the window pane. My father, smiling beneath a cherry tree. I'm getting it back. Not for him, and not for justice. For the girl in the uniform who had stood in front of a keypad and swallowed her questions. Outside the window, the lights of Seoul blur in silent flickers. Her lips part slightly. And then, let's begin. The car ride to Myeongin Drive was soundless, even though the engine hummed steadily beneath me. I hadn't spoken since stepping inside the tinted sedan my firm arranged. My reflection in the window mirrored the skyline's passing blur, shoulders squared, lips still, eyes unreadable. The pressed charcoal suit I wore hadn't a single wrinkle. Every button was deliberate, even the cufflinks. Silver-lined, minimal, reflected, control more than style. As we turned the last corner, the red-tiled roof came into view, peeking from behind the line of maple trees I used to count before falling asleep. The porch railing looked faded now, and the paint on the gate had chipped slightly at the edge. My hands stayed still on my lap, but something coiled behind my ribs. The car eased to a stop. I stepped out, with a folder tucked under one arm and my ID clipped at my waist. The badge didn't bear my birth name. It carried my legal alias, aligned beneath the firm's emblem. From the front, the house looked like a memory waiting to defend itself. But the lock on the door wasn't a keypad anymore. It opened. Moon Hae-rin stood in the doorway, hair tied back into a soft twist, her cream blouse tucked neatly into tailored slacks. Her left hand held a cup of green tea, the same kind she used to drink when dictating instructions. She blinked once. "Can I help you?" The voice was identical. Smooth, polite, polished with disinterest. Her gaze skimmed my face, then dropped my ID. There was a flicker of hesitation. Small, fast, buried beneath decades of practiced grace. "We're here for a routine property transition notice," I said. My voice was even, light. "Management has changed. The documentation is in this folder. Lease adjustment, deed transfer, and occupancy verification forms." I placed the folder gently on the entryway table, next to a bowl of potpourri that hadn't changed since I was 15. She didn't speak. Her hand remained frozen around the cup's porcelain edge. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she said slowly, choosing each syllable with the delicacy of someone used to controlling rooms. "This property is not under rental management. I'm the owner. Status has changed." I opened the folder, letting the first page face her directly. The deed. Clean transfer, full ownership, signed, notarized, sealed under the legal entity she had never once investigated. Her eyes scanned it, then scanned it again. A small breath escaped her, too shallow to be called a gasp, too late to be hidden. She reached for the lease document. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped the page, skimming the clause on adjusted market valuation. The rent had increased by 2.5 times. Not predatory, just exacting. Reflective of every amenity, every metro access point, every square meter that once silenced me. Yes, she murmured, trying to swallow the rising disbelief. This isn't sustainable. My gaze didn't falter. It's the recalibrated rate based on the district's third quarter appraisal. You're tripling my rent. I let silence answer her. I watched her eyes scan the rest of the packet. The legal notations, the warnings for missed payments, the notice for tenancy review every 30 days. A strange, artificial calm swept across her face. She folded the papers and placed them back into the folder, then turned toward the living room without inviting me in. She walked 3 steps before stopping. Who authorized this? Her voice had cooled, but something fractured behind the syllables. I did. She turned then fully. For the first time, her eyes locked onto mine, searching past the suit, past the name, past the voice that had lowered over the years. She searched for a face she once dismissed. Recognition came like a crack in porcelain. She didn't speak it. Neither did I. Instead, I pulled out the final page. The occupancy clause. Your continued stay is permitted, I said, setting the sheet beside the folder, provided you agree to the new terms. Her lips parted as if to argue, or ask, or accuse. But she stopped. Instead, she looked around the house, at the stair rail she once forbade me from touching, at the study door that was now unsealed, at the walls that echoed with nothing. This wasn't a daughter standing in her foyer. And this was her landlord. And she knew it. I stepped back toward the doorway, adjusting the crease in my sleeve. Payment schedules begin next week, I said, eyes level. Any queries may be directed to the legal liaison listed on page 3. Hayrin didn't follow. She stood beneath the low light of the chandelier she had once installed to impress her bridge club. It didn't flicker, it just glared. I turned and left and never went back to the house. The door had closed behind me like a final curtain on a play I no longer needed to act in. I didn't return to check the floors, repaint the railing, or reface the mailbox. I didn't need to see the impact, I engineered it. Everything else came through the system. The first rent notice was delivered electronically at 6:00 a.m. sharp the following Monday. Automated, cordial, irrefutable. It included a breakdown of recalculated property tax, district development influence, and the updated cost per square meter ratio. I had tied the adjustment formula to the city's housing surge reports, data that refreshed every quarter, nudging the rates upward without a finger lifted. Hayrin's acknowledgement came 2 hours later, a message with no salutation, no signature, no warmth. These numbers are excessive, let's discuss in person. She had always relied on voice, on tone, on her ability to adjust the temperature of a room by standing in it. I responded with nothing. The system did. For all tenancy matters, please contact the lease management office listed in Section 3EB. Inquiries will be addressed in standard order. A week later, a flagged violation report triggered. It was minor, unauthorized lawn remodeling, some decorative tiling done without approval. The automated notice cited line item 2.6 of the lease agreement and attached a time-stamped photo. The second violation came from a missed visitor log. A man in business attire had entered the house at 9:47 a.m. and departed before 10:30, unregistered. Another notice issued. Her second email was longer. This isn't how family treats family. I'm willing to renegotiate. Please reconsider. It ended with her name typed out completely, Moon Hayrin. As if professionalism could reverse the relationship we never had. That message went unanswered, too. It was no longer my job to respond. It was the firm's. By the third month, the recalculated rent crossed into the red line threshold for single-occupant households, not inflated indexed. I had programmed the graph myself. The rent curved up with the district's new subway development announcement. Investors were watching the neighborhood. So was I. I received regular reports through the internal dashboard, flagged alerts, rental acknowledgments, violation counts, timestamp payments. Every transaction had her name etched across it in fine digital ink. Each receipt was a quiet ledger of regret. My assistant once asked if I wanted to notify the tenant of the next valuation jump. Schedule it, I said, without looking up. Should we soften the language this time? I paused, then turned slightly. No. In the evenings, I would return home to my small apartment, the one with minimalist walls and a single chair by the window, and open the dashboard like others opened novels. Some read stories, I reviewed patterns. She was always a day late. Then, too, 1 month, she made the full payment 6 hours before default. The system didn't care about 6 hours. It cared about consistency, and I fed it numbers, formulas, dates. It fed back pressure. I never had to raise my voice, never had to speak her name. I received a notification during a quiet Wednesday meeting, a flagged communication tagged with emotional escalation. My assistant forwarded the message with a note, escalated tone, suggested personal review. I opened the email in private. You've made your point. I understand. Please, can we stop this cycle? It was the first time she used a contraction. The first time her sentence lost polish. I stared at the screen, not because it surprised me, because she still didn't understand. This isn't revenge. Revenge requires attention, confrontation, emotion. This was procedure. I didn't reply. The system did. All lease inquiries will be processed through standard protocol. For early release options, refer to Section 5. I closed the dashboard. The city glowed beneath my window, a constellation of buildings that remembered my name even when people forgot it. My tea had gone cold beside me. The room was still, not sterile, mine. There were no framed photos, no velvet rugs, just the folded document from 2 years ago resting inside a drawer. The deed to the house I no longer needed to enter. A symbol now, more than a shelter. Power didn't need presence. Understood that now. Let others perform authority through raised voices, dramatic scenes, and slammed doors. I preferred silent algorithms. The morning of the 7th month came in quiet layers. Light leaking through pale blinds, the sound of my teacup settling onto the saucer, and the soft chime of my inbox, receiving something unexpected. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, eyes fixed on the subject line. Request for lease termination, Myeongin Drive. The name was printed plainly. No greeting, no justification, no plea. Her words, once embroidered with elegance, now fit into 3 flat lines. I am unable to continue occupancy under current lease terms. Requesting formal initiation of move-out protocol. Please advise on final procedure. No signature. No apology. No punctuation after the last sentence. The document was attached as a PDF. I opened it. The digital form was filled with mechanical efficiency, every checkbox ticked, every field populated. A perfect submission. It had taken her 7 months to learn the tone I had used from the beginning. I reviewed the request in silence, tapping once on the approval field. Status. Accepted. Effective in 72 hours. No correspondence followed. I closed the file, leaned back into my chair, and watched the city blur behind my office's floor-to-ceiling glass. Across the river, cranes moved like tired metronomes, building homes for strangers who would never know the weight of an address like Myeongin Drive. I didn't feel triumphant. Not proud, not vindicated. It's over. That night, I found myself standing by my bookshelf, hand hovering near a worn blue folder tucked between property valuation manuals. I slid it free. Inside was a printout of the property's rent history. 7 months of numerical precision. 7 months of compliance, escalation, denial, and final surrender. I stared at the final timestamp. 6:42 IEM, termination confirmed. Somewhere in that house, she was packing in silence. I imagined her moving slowly through rooms she once ruled, touching objects she used to command. Her hands would hesitate at the hallway mirror, pausing before deciding whether to take it or leave it behind. And what could she take? Everything of value had always been borrowed, never owned. The neighbors had stopped waving weeks ago. Her bridge circle had dwindled. She was no longer seen at the skincare boutique she launched with borrowed equity. Her accounts, once layered in comfortable ambiguity, had dried one by one. red notices buried beneath lease violations and unpaid service invoices. It wasn't sabotage, it was sequence. And it had unraveled exactly the way pressure is meant to, quietly, from the inside. I thought of her walking through the house one last time. Maybe her heels clicked against the floor. Maybe they didn't. Maybe she touched the door frame of the study before she left it behind. The keypad lock had been removed long ago. The room stood open now, accessible to anyone with a rightful key. She would have passed by the entry table, where she once laid out utility bills like favors. She might have paused at the wall she'd once forbidden me to decorate. My constellation drawings had been painted over, but something stained deeper than paint. At 3:03 p.m., the security system sent confirmation. Primary occupant has exited the property. Door locked, alarm armed. I closed the dashboard and deleted the alert. I was done. Later that evening, I walked past the framed deed still propped against my kitchen counter. I hadn't mounted it. I didn't need it to decorate the space. My ownership didn't ask to be seen. My phone buzzed once. An auto-generated system message. Final invoice settled. File archived. Tenant history closed. No parting words. No one left to argue. I stood there, fingers grazing the seam of my coat pocket where my father's photo still remained. The edges now softened from time and skin. I didn't pull it out. Instead, I walked to the window, opened it slightly, and let the city's night air move through my apartment like a tide I had once feared but now understood. The house greeted me in silence. For a long time, I didn't move from the sidewalk. My shadow fell across the gate, stretching toward the entry path like it was asking permission. I let my hand hover near the latch, the weight of the key cold against my palm. 7 years ago, I had walked away from this threshold with a suitcase and a tight jaw. Now, I returned with a key that fit too easily. The lock gave no resistance. I stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath my heel, not from disrepair, but from remembering too much. Dust clung to the edges of the hallway, soft as lint. The lights were off, and the scent of something faint and sour lingered. Old tea leaves left in a bin, maybe. Nothing had been aired out. The emptiness didn't shock me. What startled me was how much smaller it all felt. The walls that once seemed to tower now looked narrow. The hallway less like a corridor and more like a spine that had finally bent. My eyes moved slowly across the frame, still hanging. One was crooked, the nail sagging. The glass was smudged. The living room echoed when I stepped in. No furniture. Only the outline of where the velvet couch used to sit, faded into the rug. I walked further, fingers grazing the wall lightly, like reading Braille from an old life. The scuff mark from when I'd tripped over a backpack in middle school still etched near the baseboard. She hadn't painted over it. Perhaps she hadn't noticed. I passed the kitchen. Cabinets hung open. One drawer still bore the rubber lining my father had installed when I was too short to reach the top shelves. I paused, then turned left. The study door stood ajar. The last time I'd seen it, it had a keypad lock, a screen that blinked red at me for months. Now it swung open with a tired creak, like the house itself was exhaling. I stepped inside. The room had been emptied. No desk, no chair. The blinds were drawn halfway, allowing narrow strips of late afternoon light to slice through the dust. The air was warmer here, stale but holding something. In the center of the floor was a single object. A small wooden box, unlabeled, lightly polished. My heartbeat slowed the moment I saw it. Not from tension, from inevitability. I knelt beside it, the floor pressing cold through my trousers. My hands moved slower than necessary. My breath thinned without warning. The latch clicked. Inside, one envelope, thick, cream-colored, my name written in my father's unmistakable hand. Jiwan, not my daughter. Not for when you're ready. Just Jiwan. I touched the edge of the flap. My fingers trembled, not from nerves, but from the memory of a voice I hadn't heard in almost a decade. I opened it. There was no introduction, no long-winded letter, no dramatic confession. Just a single sheet. I know you're reading this alone, that's how it had to be. I'm sorry for everything you'll discover, for what she'll try to keep from you. I didn't know how much would disappear until it was too late to shield you from it. But I knew one thing. You'd come back, not for revenge, but for truth. And you'd find it quietly. I left the study to you because you always asked questions, because you never took silence as an answer. That's what makes you dangerous. And that's what makes you mine. Yeah. I stared at the ink until it blurred. Not from tears, my eyes had dried somewhere between university and strategy, but my throat felt tight. I folded the letter once, then again, and stood. In the corner of the study, a drawer remained, the one she never touched. I opened it. Still empty. I placed the letter inside, closed it, locked it. Not to bury it, but to keep it. I didn't need to reread it, I had memorized every word. Outside, wind moved the tree branches. They scratched against the window softly, like a rhythm I'd almost forgotten. My feet carried me back to the front hallway. I looked once more at the threshold. There was no portrait. No trace of her. Even the scent of her perfume, once a constant, was gone. The house didn't belong to her anymore. And it had never truly belonged to me. Until now. I reached into my coat pocket, retrieved a small object wrapped in paper. A brass nameplate. I walked outside and fastened it onto the stone pillar beside the gate, where the old plaque used to hang. So Jiwan, registered owner. Beneath it, in smaller letters, lease active, none. The early morning light was pale and impartial. A hushed kind of gold stretched across the empty street, as if the sky itself wanted to avoid disturbance. I stood at the front gate, coat buttoned high, sleeves crisp against my wrist, and the brass plate wrapped in cloth resting in my palm like a seal not yet pressed. The house was behind me, still, modest, unoccupied. Its windows reflected the sky. They didn't blink, didn't glare, didn't ask for attention. It stood now as it should have always stood, quiet, untethered, fully mine. The gatepost was still marked with the faded square where Hayren's nameplate had once hung. The screws had been removed months ago, but the outline remained, a pale frame surrounded by weather-darkened stone. I could still remember the first time I noticed her name engraved there, the way it seemed to flash in the sunlight like something earned. My name hadn't appeared anywhere in that house. Not on deeds, not on accounts, not even on the door of the room I'd once called mine. I wiped the surface clean with my sleeve and unwrapped the brass. It caught the morning light instantly. So, Jiwan? Registered owner, lease active, none. I fastened it without ceremony. The sound of the screws turning into stone echoed faintly in the cold air. Not a hammer, not a bang, just the quiet resistance of permanence settling into place. Beneath the name, etched in smaller script, more for me than anyone else. Delayed doesn't mean lost. I stepped back and looked at it. For a long time. No fanfare, no onlookers. This was not a victory parade. It was a return to order. Behind me, the house waited, stripped of its ghosts. There was no scent of perfume on the stairs, no trace of paper lilies in the guest room vase, no footsteps on the upper floor. Even the silence had changed. It wasn't cold now. It was clean, unpossessed. The study door remained closed. Not locked, not guarded, closed because I had nothing left to retrieve. My father's letter remained in its drawer, untouched since the moment I laid it there. The act of reading it had been the final turning key, not to open anything, but to seal it. I had not returned to live here. I had not brought boxes, no rugs, no framed degrees. My apartment across the city still housed those things. This place was not for starting over. It was for closure. I walked the perimeter once, slowly, my hand trailing against the garden wall where jasmine once grew wild. The pots were empty now, soil hardened and roots long gone. I had no urge to replant. Some absences do not beg to be filled. A cat crossed the road quietly behind me, pausing once to glance up at the gate before continuing down the curb. A bicycle bell rang 2 streets over. The world kept moving. No one would stop to ask who lived here now. No one would stare in awe or envy or curiosity. And that was the point. I didn't need them to know. I didn't need them to understand what this place once did to me, or what I had done to reclaim it. Only I needed to know. Only I needed to stand here, with both feet firm on the concrete, air in my lungs, and not a single trace of her name left within these walls. She hadn't reached out since the lease termination. No final note, no parting accusation, not even the common courtesy of bitterness. That silence had been louder than any plea for forgiveness could have been. I hadn't expected remorse. What she feared wasn't guilt, it was irrelevance. And that's what I had given her. No stage, no confrontation, no speech. Only erasure. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. A calendar reminder. Final property inspection marked as complete. I dismissed it without looking. The nameplate glowed a soft gold now in full sun. We belong. Without asking to, I turned one last time and faced the house directly. It did not feel triumphant. It felt still, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Like arriving home and knowing you don't have to knock